Hey there, it's Michael. Welcome to Whole Again, the show that's here in support of you creating a meaningful life and the person you're becoming. And I'm excited to share a new series with you that will air this summer as America turns 250 years old, which is still pretty young relative to many other countries across this big blue marble that we all share. The series is called A Perfectly Imperfect Union. In 2022, I rode my bike across America, from Astoria, Oregon to the Lincoln Memorial. My wife drove our RV, and she had two co-pilots, Jester and Hope, two Springer Spaniels. And when we did it, America was coming out of the pandemic, and we were hurting from things that had happened prior to the pandemic. Of course, going through what we all went through. And at that time, and this is something I still believe today, is that we were entering an inflection point. An inflection point for us to hopefully pause, breathe, and reflect on who we wish to become as individuals, as communities, and as a country. As I pedaled across America, I wanted to share America's beauty with others, her natural beauty and the beauty of her people. And I also wanted to share where we were hurting. As America turns 250, I believe Kinstugi, which is something we use as a metaphor here at Whole Again, is a perfect metaphor for where we are as a country. There's so much beauty to celebrate, and we can also acknowledge that parts of us feel broken or are broken, but we can find a way to come back together, just like Kinstugi teaches us. And when we do, we don't try to erase or cover up where we have scars or blemishes. We highlight them in gold, and we celebrate them as symbols of our strength and resilience. Kinstugi is called the golden repair, and in essence, we can see beauty in something that's perfectly imperfect. During this series, I plan to speak to at least two people in each state and the District of Columbia. So 102 conversations with real folk, as I like to say. We're going to let the celebrities and the big influencers have their day somewhere else. But here, I want to reach out and talk to real people and listen to their reflections as they think about America turning 250 years old. And my hope is that you'll tune in to at least one, if not all 102. Because my theory going into this is that you'll hear different perspectives. Some may be aligned with yours. Others may not. But my hope is that you hear the goodness in your fellow citizens and realize, as Maya Angelou shared with us, we are more alike, my friends, than we are unalike. We are more alike, my friends, than we are unalike. I've had the privilege of traveling all over the world and all over this country. And this belief is something that I hold deep inside of me. So yes, I do believe that we are more alike, my friends, than we are unalike. So if you're ready to get to know one of your perfectly imperfect neighbors, just like all of us, take a healthy breath in and a slow, releasing breath out, and get to know Nelson Wang. Nelson, so good to see you, my friend. Thanks for joining me here on A Perfectly Imperfect Union. How are you feeling today?
Yeah, Yeah, my name is Nelson Wang. I am a longtime business journalist. I live in New York City. I grew up on Long Island. My parents immigrated from Hong Kong, and I was actually born in Westchester, New York, and then my parents moved to Long Island when I was quite young. And let's see, yeah, like I said, I went, well, I didn't say this part, but I went to school in Boston, and right after I graduated, I came to live in Manhattan, and started looking for journalism jobs, and I have not moved or been anywhere since. So coming on 33, 34 years now in Manhattan. And I've fallen in and out of love, I think, a bit with New York City, but lately it's been much heavier on the love side. And I just love the energy and the humanity and the possibilities and the diversity of New York City. So, and just sort of just quickly work wise, I've worked for a bunch of different business publications and websites, but now in the last year and a half, I've been doing some freelance editing and writing work, and I'm trying to work on some personal book projects and develop those.
I love it. I love it. So I know you're a huge Knicks fan, so obviously the energy of New York and the Knicks has is sort of buoyed everyone's enthusiasm for the city. But for those that have never been to New York City,
Yeah.
New York's a big state. Not everyone's been to the Empire State. I grew up in Rochester, which seems like a miles and away from New York City. Rochester has more of a Midwestern vibe to it than a big city like New York and Long Island. So what's something really cool about Long Island, New York City, that part of the state that someone may not know about if they've never been there?
Yeah. That's a good question because I do have a little bit of the New York arrogance, I think, in terms of like, well, of course, everyone's been here and knows
Yes.
all about it and has been to the Empire State Building. Uh, and of course, that's not true. But yeah, I would say it's sort of everything that you would think, just in terms of the energy and the density and the action and just sort of everything you could possibly ever want or conceive of, in terms of neighborhoods and foods and activities and just every endeavor of human activity is here, uh, just for the taking. So I love it, but it is interesting when I do know people who are overwhelmed by it and don't like it, and that probably is more the norm than I think. It's a lot, and it can get in your face and it can get exhausting and it can be really dirty and gritty, but for people who like that whole range of experience, it's like, I can't imagine living anywhere else. I'll mention
Mm,
one quick thing, and it's often quoted, but I always, when people ask me about New York City and how New Yorkers feel about it, I always quote that it's a famous quote from John Updike, who was a writer at the New Yorker, and it turns out, I looked it up recently. He didn't. I thought he wrote in an essay about New York, which you would expect, but it actually is from one of his novels. I think it's Run Rabbit, or one of the Rabbit novels, and one of the characters is a lifelong New Yorker and says something like, you know, uh, the true New Yorker secretly believes that anyone not living in New York City has to, in some sense, be kidding. And like, that captures, how wonderful we all think it is, and also the arrogance of it. And I sometimes will add that, like, I personally am in that camp, and I even remove the secretly part. Like, I just openly believe that, so.
yeah, yeah. It brings up I think it was a New Yorker cover of the viewpoint, the perspective of people who live in Manhattan. It's like it's the center of the universe, and like everything beyond the Hudson River west is like small potatoes, or it just is irrelevant. Or I can see the image of the cover, but maybe not the full essence of it. It comes to my memory, but
I know
th
exactly the cover you're talking about.
yeah.
It's quite famous, and it's the same ethos. Yeah, it's 11th
Yeah.
Avenue, 12th Avenue, and then it's like a little thing for Chicago and a little thing for the Rocky Mountains, and then it's the West Coast and the Pacific Ocean, you know?
Yes, yeah, yeah. So, I've definitely experienced that living, in these parts, so wait, if you gathered all your closest friends, maybe you're out in Central Park, which is a great
Mhm.
oasis, within New York City. Maybe it's a big picnic, and people are gathered around, and they ask you, Nelson, what America means to you. How do you respond?
Yeah, I do think a huge part of it is of the sort of American experiment, is the openness to immigration and the idea that, this country could be a country could be a lot stronger for our differences and diversity, as opposed to weaker, which I think maybe is the more natural assumption, and but of course America, at least in some broad ways, to has shown that this works, and America obviously has become, an incredibly powerful nation, in large part, I think, because of those differences and diversity and those different ideas and backgrounds of people and the questioning of ideas that comes from, living with groups of different people. But I would point out, and I think has been pointed out in some of your podcasts too, that really, when people are making this big deal about the 250th anniversary of the country, but that's such a short span of time.
Yes.
When you think
Yes.
about European countries or ancient civilizations. So it's a real, just kind of a blip, but to us obviously seems hugely uh, lengthy and monumental, and as though this experiment has been carried on for a long time, but it really hasn't. And obviously we're seeing some cracks and fault lines in that belief and thinking now. But yeah, I would say that America really, to me, is the belief and power of people coming together from all around the world and joining here. And that is partly my personal story as well, which, we can probably get into later.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you a little bit more. You mentioned up front that your parents immigrated from Hong Kong, and the I do want to capture this because other people in the series have mentioned it. We are still so young as a country, even though we think we're so old, especially relative to other countries around the planet. And when I think of New York in particular, much what you shared in your response there, I look at New York and I was like, all these different people from all around the world getting shoved into this small little island known as Manhattan. They love different people. They pray to different gods if they pray. They might vote a little bit differently. They're, coming from different cultures. And somehow we find a way, although it's not perfect, it's messy, it's ragged at times, it's chaotic. Like the folks in New York City live in relative peace. They find a way to make it work. And so I do, when I look at New York City in particular, I see our promise, like we can do this. We can have all these different perspectives all together and we can find a way to make it work fairly well, albeit not perfectly. So I loved what you just shared there. But yeah, if you could, yeah, what more do you know about your parents' story of coming here and immigrating to the country?
Yeah, I do know the major outlines, and I was fortunate enough last year. I alluded to the fact that I had been trying to work on some personal book projects, and one of the ideas was sort of a personal history. And I was fortunate enough to interview my father um, last year. I did a couple of interviews with him throughout the course of the year and got to know more about his history. So it kind of cleared up some things. But the basic outlines were that. So my dad was originally from Shanghai. He was born in 1930, and he was kind of coming of age when the communists took over the mainland. When they won their battle against the nationalists, and the communists took over in 1949. And like a lot of Shanghainese, he left the city to go to Taiwan or Hong Kong. My dad went to Hong Kong, and he sort of made his way there for a couple of years, and then through some family connections, started working in finance and as an accountant as well. Met my mother after a couple of years, and after they got married, they uh, they immigrated to first to Toronto and then to the U.S. Uh, and the main reason was that my father had seen, the the monumental changes that the communists had affected in China, and obviously really upended and often ruined a lot of people's lives, um, and so when he was living in Hong Kong in the '60s, in the mid '60s, the Cultural Revolution was gaining a lot of steam on the mainland, and threatening even more changes and more extreme forms of government and rule. And it was really threatening to spill over into Hong Kong, even though it was uh, a British colony and ruled separately. So my dad wanted no part of that, like, and really made plans to move elsewhere. Interestingly, the revolution, the the Cultural Revolution, never took over Hong Kong. It never. I'm not exactly sure why, like what kind of borders or safeguards in place or negotiations with the English government happened, but um, it never, I would say they never took over Hong Kong, and um, Hong Kong ended up becoming an incredibly prosperous place, as the sort of nexus between East and West. And, a lot of my parents' friends and families who remained in Hong Kong ended up, really prospering. And my dad did fine in the U.S. as well, but it was interesting that, what he was fearful of never sort of came to pass. Um, but yeah, I was part of I was the first generation to be born in the U.S. My brother was born in Hong Kong. Actually, I
Okay.
sometimes forget that, just before they left. So I'm technically the first generation of our family. My brother isn't even, but of course he grew up in the U.S. as
Sure.
well, and so yeah, we settled when in Westchester. We ended up, my parents couldn't afford to buy a place in Westchester. They looked, Long Island was a lot cheaper at the time and had good school districts. And so that's where I grew up. And there were a lot of different waves of Chinese immigration, and so we were part of probably a later wave, and probably more professional, and there were lots of pockets of that, like a lot of
Yes.
academics coming over, et cetera. But we're probably part of one of those sort of middle waves of sort of middle class immigrants, seeking, having job opportunities, seeking, even more opportunity or more freedom than they would have had, otherwise in China or Hong Kong or Taiwan.
Very interesting. That's so cool. Thanks for sharing that. It's a good great background. And what a great story of coming here and, with the promise of greater opportunities. And the thing is like the cost of living in Westchester is still more expensive than it is out in Long Island.
Yeah,
So
yeah, yeah,
it's still you need like about 4 different jobs to be able to afford to live in Westchester nowadays, it feels like. So we mentioned up front a little bit about how young the country is, how messy or ragged democracy can be, and just as a country, we can have little fraying around the edges, maybe even cracks or divisiveness. So I think, as you know, Nelson, I use the Japanese art form of kintsugi as a metaphor for this series. So if you could just pick one thing that could help us feel more connected, it could maybe help us heal or grow. Maybe not, again, not in a perfect way, but in a meaningful first step. What would it be?
This is not, you know, really groundbreaking, but I do feel that the biggest issues that we have currently come from politicians, and it's also our political system that encourages this, but in particular, the particular politicians that, you know, that we have in power currently that are sort of exploiting and using our differences, to achieve personal gain and maybe preserve their office and et cetera. I just think it's very selfish and calculating to do that, and it's really sort of subverting the whole you know dynamic that we talked about earlier about the promise of America. That we celebrate our differences, we benefit and are stronger for our differences, as opposed to sort of exploiting them, or uh, manipulating them for you know various people's personal enrichment or gain. And yeah, I think that's really kind of poisoned uh, a lot of the promise of the country. So I don't know. I mean, I hope that the sort of natural corrective of the electoral system, works its way and replaces those people, and fixes things. Um, I don't. Other than that, I don't. There's probably a lot of people who are thinking about how to fix the system. I don't really know what the solutions are, but I think that's a really big uh, part of the problem, that needs to be addressed.
Yeah, in today's culture, there's so many politicians definitely fall into this category, but even outside influencers or I- maybe call them celebrities or whomever, seem to peddle in trying to divide us. Maybe tap into our weak spots of our biology, our fears, if you will, all for their gain, and we can see it happening in real time. So I'm with you. I'm hoping that we can, as a population, as a voting electric, a voting group, can hopefully get in leaders that can find ways to bring us together and not divide us for their own wealth, right? And
Yeah,
so
yeah.
yeah.
I think I can note one possible corrective. I think a lot of this is not unconnected to the rise of social media, which encourages
Mm,
divisive. Like that's what gets attention.
yes.
The more outrageous you go, and that produces a certain type of you know politician, and so that whole idea of the medium, really affecting, television ushered in the age of, you had to be telegenic and really good on TV,
Yes.
intimidating.
Yes.
And then uh, I think there was something in the middle, maybe not as dramatic with the internet, like, but then social media obviously has really kind of branded its own type of avatars and uh, beneficiaries of that, and I think that um, I think that's a huge problem, and maybe that's something that is easier to do something about. And I, I don't know exactly what the solutions are, but it seems like we are trying to curb some of the excesses of social media now.
Yeah, I think there's some voices out there trying to like r- help us improve our overall awareness and sort of wake up to the fact that, as you mentioned, because of all these different vehicles, we've our attention has run to the edges. And it's like, what can be edgier and edgier and edgier, and we keep on going to that edge, and we lose sight of like actually what's in the middle. And what's in the middle makes communities and countries and societies run. And it might be really boring, and people might not want to grab onto it and watch a 15-second clip, but that's the stuff that actually makes things happen. So our conversation today will get released after America officially turns 250, because that comes up in 2 days as we sit here and record our conversation. So, but we still have time to celebrate. So a lot of times in a celebration, at least a birthday celebration in this country, we have cake. Although through this series, I've learned that not everyone is into having birthday cake. So this is a two-part question for you, Nelson. If you are serving cake for America's 250th, what kind of cake are you serving? And then the second part of the question is, what are you wishing for as you blow out the candles?
Yeah. The first thing that comes to mind for cake, I was trying to think of something ethnic, like something Asian inflected, uh, but I the first thing that comes to mind is like whatever the cake equivalent of Neapolitan ice cream is. So you get
Okay,
the
okay.
various different colors.
All
So it
right.
could be red, white, and blue, but just a celebration of diversity. I think it all comes together. You have these disparate parts that the whole is more delicious and greater, than the sum of its parts. So I think that would be apt. What am I wishing for? Yeah, I mean, it relates again to the idea of uh, celebrating and being curious about our differences with each other and trying to find the our commonality, which is not hard to do. I don't think
Yeah,
it has become hard to do, but I think when we start to think and appreciate and be curious about what we have in common with others, our humanity, our desires, uh, our basic desires to love and be loved, and to live in some level of security and stability, and to connect with others. You know, I think that is really needed right now, and I think that's when we're at our happiest and most productive. When we can connect with others and do things with others and collaborate with them. So that would be my wish for the country.
all right. I think it's a good wish. So out of curiosity, is there in the Chinese uh, culture, is there a particular thing that one gets on their birthday? Like is it a treat like cake, or do you know, is it something else?
Yeah, I don't think there is one traditional thing, which is
Okay,
interesting because there are so many Chinese traditions, and there's very specific holidays where you have very specific observances. I don't
sure.
think they actually make as big a deal of birthdays as they do in the West, and maybe that's sort of an individual versus collectivism, a more collectivist culture, you know?
Yes.
So,
Yeah.
a lot of the holidays are about offering respect to ancestors, frankly.
Well, that's interesting. Yeah. So, I, when I first started asking this question, I was, I came at it from thinking everyone loves cake because, hey, I love cake, which is a little bit of the project, is to open up our
Yeah.
awareness that not everyone likes what you like. Like we all have different taste buds and preferences and all that good stuff like that. So we'll round out our chat here with this question. I recently chatted with Shannon from Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and his question to you, Nelson, is this: what is something you've read or heard that you hope that almost everyone else understood or knew about?
Yeah, I recently, for a project that I'm working on, I recently reread parts of a Michael Lewis book called The Undoing Project,
Okay.
and it's a weird title that it's not actually that appealing, but I'm a huge fan of Michael Lewis, as most
Yeah,
people
sure.
are,
Yeah.
and a lot of what he writes about in like Moneyball is the most famous. He writes about the inherent human biases that we have. Somebody doesn't look like the typical image of a baseball player or a basketball player, like not the right race or not the right look or the body type or whatever, and the Undoing Project is sort of a continuation of that theme, and it looks at these two behavioral economists. One of them is Daniel Kahneman, and
Okay.
this Dan Ariely, I think, is his collaborator. You'd have to double check on it, but they both really looked at these inherent biases that humans are incredibly susceptible to. It's useful to have these sort of rules of thumb and to have these like quick interpretations of things, but they often, they often are incorrect and can lead to real big errors of judgment that can be really counterproductive, and destructive in some cases. So, in the Undoing Project refers to a couple things, like their friendship like came undone for some weird reasons, but it also refers to their idea of like I think of their undoing this idea that humans are inherently irrational and act in rational ways, right? Um, and so I think it's really valuable for people to understand that, both in the big picture that like humans are not rational, and in your dealings with other people, like even people that you're close to, like we all have these inherent biases that are really hard to give up, or be convinced of otherwise. And so in some cases you have to accept that people are going to have these biases, and maybe if you can change it, like you can only kind of chip away at it slowly over time. But to be aware in our own lives of the biases that we might have, and also maybe to show some grace for like the biases that other people have, and know that there's reasons why they might not be doing something that is logical, and to kind of understand and appreciate that. So
I love that. We certainly do have biases that go into almost everything. When I when I rode my bike across the country, I went into states that I had never been to, and some massively huge states like Montana and Wyoming, which I've shared in the past here in this series. And really was like no one around. And, and this is coming from New Jersey, which is the most densely populated state, and like we're obviously right next to New York City, the biggest city in America. So if your whole lived experience is this part of the world, New York, New Jersey, you're gonna come out of it with uh, different types of emotional experiences and lived experiences and biases. I compare it to if you lived out in rural Montana, where you couldn't even see your neighbor. Like you live on a ranch, and this is all you saw. And it's for me, going through that experience, kind of doing that trip, really did underscore that we all have our own lived experiences, and to appreciate that we do, and we all come into any type of relationship or any type of moment with a bias. And sometimes we're aware of it, and sometimes it's unconscious, and to give each other a bit of grace as we try to navigate this thing called life and figure it all out. So yeah, I'm gonna check out this project, and I'll put a link to it so other people can also investigate it further. So here's your opportunity, though, Nelson, to ask a question of the next person I chat with.
yep, I thought about this a little bit beforehand, knowing that something you do. Uh, And for me, I'm a huge consumer of media, whether it's movies or books, magazines, podcasts. So, and I was trying to tie it into a little bit to something, America related or themed. So, my question for the next interview subject is what subject do you wish that the documentarian Ken Burns would would cover as his next subject?
Okay.
Yeah,
All
so he's
right.
obviously known for, like, baseball and jazz and the Civil War. I guess baseball and the Civil War are probably the most famous, but he's obviously been a huge chronicler of, very specifically American pieces of history and institutions. Um, and so I'd be curious you know, what people would most wanna know more about or feel like would be most interesting to really delve deep, and then past maybe there's some of their common perceptions of
Yeah.
some bit of something American, very specifically American, that they haven't seen yet.
Very cool. Well, I'll definitely ask the next person I chat with in this
Yeah, you
series.
can you can rephrase it because I don't think
No problem. But I'm intrigued about yeah, the answers we're gonna get with this one. So I love it. I love the question. So Nelson, thanks for joining me on A Perfectly Imperfect Union and all the work that you're doing to help us become just that, a little perfectly imperfect. And I appreciate the ripple effect you're putting into the world. So again, thanks for being here. Thanks for joining me.
Yeah, no, I really enjoyed talking about this and thinking about these topics, and think you're doing really a wonderful project.
Thank you, sir. Be well, stay cool.
All right, you too. Take care.
I had the opportunity to meet Nelson in person at a networking event. One of the things I'm trying to do this year is to get out with people more, again, in real life. And it was hosted by one of our fellow friends, Ramon Ray, who is a super energetic guy. And there was something about Nelson that made me want to talk to him more. So I'm so thankful that he joined us here on our Perfectly Imperfect series. And I love his question at the end. So, how would you answer it? What would you tell Ken Burns he should do his next documentary series on? Let me know in the comments. And I hope you'll check out the next episode of Whole Again. And of course, continue listening in to the rest of our series here on A Perfectly Imperfect Union. Reflections as America celebrates year 250. But until then, let's remember to celebrate our scars as golden symbols of our strength and resilience. And don't forget to have fun. Storm in the castle. And if you wish to learn more about creating beautiful ripples and how to prevent a bad moment from turning into a bad day, please visit my website, michaelobrienshift.com, and sign up for my newsletter called The Ripple Effect. And join us each Monday, Wednesday, and Friday here at Whole Again and discover how you can heal, grow, and become more resilient. And celebrate our scars as golden symbols of strength and resilience. Until then, remember, you can always come back to your breath. You've got this, and